Hey everyone, and welcome to The Explainer. Today, we're diving into this truly fascinating intersection where high-profile, glamorous diplomacy meets some pretty gritty, escalating global volatility. Now, if you've glanced at the news lately, you've definitely seen the incredible pageantry of the UK royal visit to the United States. It looks like the ultimate celebration of an unbreakable alliance, right? But as we pull back the curtain today, we're going to see that beneath this polished royal veneer, the international stage is literally a powder keg right now.
Because, to really understand what's happening, you have to look past the perfectly staged photo ops. The reality is that despite all this current royal fanfare, we are actually witnessing historically disastrous diplomatic tension between these two nations. In fact, analysts are calling this the worst fracture in US-UK relations since the 1956 Suez Crisis. So how did we get here? And how on earth does a transatlantic disagreement ripple out to affect global energy markets and active war zones?
Well, okay, let's dive into this. Here is our roadmap for today. 1. The historic royal visit. 2. Behind the diplomatic smiles. 3. The Strait of Hormuz conflict. 4. The global energy shock. And 5. Frontlines, Ukraine to Gaza.
All right, starting right off with Section 1, the historic royal visit.
Historically speaking, this visit is an incredibly big deal. It lines up perfectly with the 250th anniversary of America's Declaration of Independence from Britain. Plus, it's actually the first U.S. visit by a British monarch in nearly 2 decades, the last one being Queen Elizabeth II way back in 2007. And man, the welcoming events have been spectacular. They had this grand formal arrival on the White House South Lawn featuring a massive military review, which even included the Space Force Honor Guard established by President Trump. And really signaling this intersection of modern power and traditional royalty, the VIP list was packed with bipartisan lawmakers and major tech giants. We're talking Apple CEO Tim Cook and NVIDIA CEO Jensen Huang right there in the crowd.
Publicly, the rhetoric has been overwhelmingly warm. President Trump was out there praising the deep bond between the nations, officially calling Britain America's closest friend. He was even sharing these personal anecdotes about his Scottish-born mother's admiration for the royal family, and he enthusiastically brought up this rather quirky Daily Mail claim that he and King Charles might actually be 15th cousins. On the British side, palace sources are noting that the King's upcoming address to Congress is going to focus heavily on our shared history, democratic values, and importantly, expressing solidarity regarding that Cole Thomas Allen security breach. That major physical intrusion we saw at the White House Correspondents' Dinner.
But what happens when the cameras turn off? Let's pivot to Section 2, behind the diplomatic smiles.
When the cameras are gone, the contrast between the public perception and political reality is just stark. Publicly you had First Lady Melania Trump and Queen Camilla appearing in these perfectly coordinated white ensembles, a detail that was heavily planned through diplomatic channels to project total unity. But behind closed doors, President Trump has been harshly criticizing British Prime Minister Keir Starmer. And why? Mainly because Britain is completely refusing to join the US-Iran war. On top of that, the US is actively threatening to impose heavy tariffs if Britain doesn't drop its digital services tax. So beneath the surface, the political acrimony is intense.
And all this underlying friction was kind of blown wide open by some explosive leaked remarks from British Ambassador Christian Turner. Turner was actually recorded telling British students that the famous US-UK special relationship is mostly just nostalgic at this point. He even suggested that Israel is probably the only country with a truly special relationship with the US right now. But even more explosively, he expressed total astonishment that the Jeffrey Epstein scandal hasn't really touched US officials, especially when you look at how severely it rocked the British monarchy with Prince Andrew. And hey, this isn't just past history either. Over in the US, Representative Ro Khanna is actively pushing for King Charles to officially acknowledge Epstein survivors during this exact trip.
So what's driving a lot of this global stress? Let's look at Section 3, the Strait of Hormuz conflict.
The primary geopolitical catalyst exacerbating these transatlantic tensions lies right in the Middle East, specifically the Strait of Hormuz. Get this, 1/5 of the entire world's global oil transits through this single maritime bottleneck. It is the absolute center of the US-Iran conflict right now. President Trump has declared that Iran is basically in a state of collapse due to the US blockade, though he did recently reject a peace proposal brokered by Pakistan because, according to him, it totally failed to address Tehran's nuclear program.
Inside Iran, things are moving incredibly fast following the death of Supreme Leader Ali Khamenei, who has now been succeeded by his son, Mojtaba. Crucially, the inability to sell oil due to these sanctions has completely exhausted Iran's storage capacity. To adapt, they're literally rebooting derelict industrial junk sites and using aging 30-year-old oil tankers just to hold their reserves. However, the data analytics firm Kepler notes that the true financial impact of these sanctions won't actually cripple Iran for another few months. Meanwhile, diplomatic outrage is spiking globally. The UN recently appointed Iran as a vice president of the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty Review Conference, which raised a lot of eyebrows, and a Bahraini court just sentenced 30 individuals for spying and supporting Iran-orchestrated terrorist acts.
Which brings us to Section 4, the global energy shock.
Now, you might be wondering, why does a blockade thousands of miles away matter to you? Well, the answer is $2.5 billion. Let me put that into perspective. Chevron CEO Mike Wirth is issuing some really stark warnings right now that aviation fuel supplies are tightening significantly. Because of the conflict in the Middle East, U.S. budget airlines are facing such surging fuel costs that they are actively seeking a massive $2.5 billion federal bailout. This energy crisis isn't just overseas, it's bleeding directly into U.S. consumer confidence, leaving everyday citizens struggling with rising inflation.
Adding literal fuel to this fire is a massive shakeup in the global energy market. The United Arab Emirates has officially announced it is fully exiting the OPEC cartel, effective May 1st. Their motivation? They want energy production flexibility completely free from OPEC quotas. But this move also exposes a growing rift within the Gulf Cooperation Council, showing that the UAE is now directly competing with Saudi Arabia for energy dominance. The markets are fracturing, plain and simple.
And finally, let's wrap up with Section 5, Front Lines, Ukraine to Gaza. Let's rapidly survey the concurrent global flashpoints that are making the international stage an absolute powder keg right now, starting over in Europe. Ukraine's defense ministry claims a staggering 33,000 Russian drones were shot down in the month of March alone. At the exact same time, Kyiv's forces are using long-range drones to actively target Russian oil refineries on the Black Sea. And they are putting heavy pressure on Israel to investigate a cargo ship in Haifa, suspected of carrying grain stolen from Russian-occupied Ukrainian territories. Speaking of the Middle East, the Israel-Lebanon border is incredibly volatile. The IDF has proposed a 10-kilometer buffer zone in southern Lebanon. Israeli Foreign Minister Gideon Sa'ar defends this military operation as an absolute necessity, asserting Israel has no territorial ambitions but must act after a fragile temporary ceasefire collapsed. This comes as the IDF accused Hezbollah of launching explosive drones at their troops, which resulted in the urgent evacuation of 16 different towns and villages in the area. Further south in the Gaza Strip, the humanitarian numbers are just stark. According to UN figures, 1.8 million Gazans are entirely dependent on aid in displacement camps. Doctors Without Borders, or MSF, has accused Israel of using water as a weapon of war, while studies show nearly all agricultural land in Gaza is damaged or completely inaccessible. And this intense international strain? It's radiating all the way back to U.S. domestic politics. Over in Congress, the debate over foreign intervention is peaking, with the Senate expected to vote and likely fail on Senator Tim Kaine's War Powers Resolution, which is aimed at blocking President Trump from taking military action against Cuba.
Wow, we've covered incredible ground today. From the perfectly coordinated white outfits on the White House lawn to the blocked oil tankers sitting in the Strait of Hormuz, all the way to the skies over Ukraine. It all leaves us with one deeply provocative question to ponder. As global tensions peak and energy markets completely fracture, can historic alliances survive the strain? Thank you so much for joining me for this explainer. Keep questioning the surface, and I'll catch you next time.